There is a second, so small it barely qualifies as time, when your entire reality changes its posture toward you. Not because the room moved, not because the people around you suddenly became different, but because something inside you clicked into a new station, and the world, in its silent way, began to echo it back. You felt this before, you just didn't have a language for it. It's that moment you wake up and for no logical reason, your chest feels heavy, like gravity has quietly doubled. Your phone lights up, the day begins, and somehow everything looks the same, but means something else. The neutral message sounds cold. The harmless delay feels like rejection. Even the sunlight on the wall feels like it's mocking you. And you tell yourself, this is just a mood. You call it a feeling, you try to ignore it. But what if it wasn't a feeling? What if it was a frequency? An invisible broadcast shaping what reality is allowed to show you? Because the most misunderstood thing about emotions is that they don't only happen to you, they happen through you. They aren't just the colour of your inner world, they are the filter that decides what counts as real, what counts as dangerous, what counts as possible. And the universe is not responding to your words or your plans as much as it responds to the signal you emit when you believe them. Have you noticed how some days you say the same sentence and get a totally different response? One day you ask a simple question and people soften. Another day you ask it the same way, yet it lands like a threat. You didn't change the words, you changed the energy underneath them, and underneath the energy is emotion. But emotion is not just sad or happy. Emotion is charge. It is motion. It is the pressure system inside your body that tells your mind how to interpret the world. And interpretation is not passive. Interpretation becomes behavior. Behavior becomes pattern. Pattern becomes destiny with a disguise. This is why two people can live the same year and end up in two different universes. One person experiences silence and hears abandonment. Another experiences silence and hears peace. One person experiences criticism and hears, I'm not enough. Another experiences criticism and hears, I'm growing, same event, different field. And here's the uncomfortable part. Your field doesn't begin in your mind, it begins in your body. Before you think fear, your breath changes. Before you decide you're unsafe, your nervous system tightens. Before you explain your sadness, your heart rhythm already shifted. Your biology becomes the antenna, and your emotion becomes the station. So when we say reality begins to shift, we're not talking about magic tricks or shallow manifestation fantasies. We're talking about something kinder and more honest. The possibility that your inner state is participating in the architecture of your experience, moment by moment, like a tuning fork shaping what can resonate. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because the second you recognize emotions as energy, the question changes forever. It's no longer, why does reality keep happening to me? It becomes, what am I broadcasting into the field without realizing it? Core premise. Emotions are not feelings, they are signals. From the moment we learn language, we are taught to misname one of the most powerful forces shaping our lives. We call emotions feelings, as if they are soft, subjective, and safely contained inside us, like private colours painted on the walls of the mind. But emotions are not decorations, they are instructions. A feeling suggests something passive, something that happens to you. But an emotion is active. It is energy in motion. It is a biological, neurological, and perceptual signal that tells your entire system how to engage with reality. And the moment you mistake that signal for your identity, when you say, I am anxious, instead of anxiety is moving through me, you surrender the controls. This is where most human suffering quietly begins. Because when an emotion becomes who you think you are, it stops being information and starts becoming destiny. Your mind rearranges itself to justify it. Your memory selects evidence to support it. Your attention filters the world until only matching patterns remain. The emotion is no longer a message, it is now a lens. And lenses don't just colour reality, they decide reality. This is why emotions feel so convincing. Fear feels like truth. Shame feels like clarity. Desire feels like fate. But none of them are the full picture. They are signals, temporary states designed to move, inform and resolve. When they are allowed to do that, they pass. When they are resisted, suppressed, or over-identified with, they loop. Think of emotion like weather inside the nervous system. A storm doesn't mean the sky is broken, it means conditions are shifting. But if you believe you are the storm, you will spend your life chasing shelter from yourself. Here is the core revelation of this journey. The universe does not respond to what you think you feel. It responds to the state you stabilize. Your stabilized emotional state becomes your baseline frequency. And that frequency quietly shapes everything. How you speak, how you listen, how you interpret ambiguity, how long you tolerate discomfort, how boldly you act, how much love you allow, how much risk feels possible. This is not philosophy, it's pattern recognition. A person stabilized in resentment will experience the world as hostile, even when it is neutral. A person stabilized in trust will experience the same world as navigable, even when it is difficult. Not because the world changed, but because the signal did. And here's where it becomes transformative. The moment you see emotions as energy instead of identity, you regain choice. Not the shallow choice of be positive, but the deeper choice of relationship. You can relate to fear without obeying it. You can listen to sadness without drowning in it. You can respect anger without turning it into destruction. You stop asking emotions to disappear. You ask them what they are trying to communicate. And when you do that, something subtle happens. Your inner world becomes intelligible instead of chaotic. Your reactions slow down. Your presence sharpens. You begin to inhabit your life instead of surviving it. That is the second everything begins to shift, not because you forced a new reality, but because you stopped misreading the signal that was shaping the old one. Scientific bridge. When biology confirms the invisible. If emotions were merely private feelings, the body would remain neutral while they passed through. But it doesn't. The body changes first, often before the mind has time to form a thought. That alone should tell us something important. Emotion is not an abstract experience. It is a physiological event with measurable consequences. Your heart, for example, does not beat like a metronome. Its rhythm constantly shifts in response to emotional state. Under stress, the rhythm becomes jagged and incoherent, peaks and drops that reflect internal conflict. Under calm presence, appreciation, or grounded focus, the rhythm smooths into a coherent wave. This pattern is not poetic language. It is recorded data, and coherence matters because the heart communicates with the brain more than the brain communicates with the heart. When the heart signal is chaotic, the brain interprets the world as less predictable and more threatening. Decision-making becomes reactive. Attention narrows. The future feels urgent and dangerous. But when the heart rhythm is coherent, the brain receives a different message. It opens, it integrates. It becomes capable of holding complexity without panic. Now look at the brain itself. Neural networks operate through oscillations, waves of electrical activity that synchronize different regions. Fear shifts dominance towards survival circuits. Curiosity and safety allow higher integration. This is why anxiety feels like tunnel vision and presence feels like spaciousness. The frequency of your internal state literally changes what the brain is able to process. Then there is the vagus nerve, the great communicator between brain, heart, lungs, and gut. Its tone determines how quickly you recover from stress, how safe you feel in social situations, and how resilient you are under pressure. Emotional states alter vagal tone. Slow, steady emotions strengthen it. Chronic fear weakens it. This is not spiritual speculation, it is anatomy. So when we speak of emotion as energy, we are describing something precise. Patterned physiological information moving through the system, shaping perception, behavior, and interaction. Your emotional state is not separate from your biology. It is your biology in motion, and this is where the quantum hint quietly enters, not as fantasy, but as humility. Modern physics has shown us that observation is not always a neutral act. Measurement, context, and relationship matter in how systems are described. David Bohm suggested that reality unfolds from a deeper implicate order, where separation is an appearance rather than a fact. While emotions do not collapse wave functions like switches, they do shape the observer. and the observer is part of the system. You do not meet reality as a blank slate. You meet it through a nervous system conditioned by memory, expectation, and emotional tone. That conditioning influences what you notice, what you ignore, and how you respond. Over time, response becomes pattern. Pattern becomes experience. This is not mystical thinking, it is systems thinking. Your inner frequency alters your outward behavior. Your behavior alters your environment. Your environment feeds back into your inner state. A loop forms. Change the frequency, and the loop reorganizes. So when science and ancient wisdom quietly agree on one thing, it is this: you are not a passive observer in the universe. You are a participant whose internal state shapes the field of experience. And the moment you see that, emotion stops being weakness. It becomes leverage. Ancient parallels, what the mystics were really pointing toward. Long before laboratories, scanners, and equations, human beings were already mapping the terrain of inner frequency. They didn't call it neuroscience or biology. They called it spirit, breath, harmony, alignment. But the territory was the same. In the Upanishads, the inner world is described as layered: sense, mind, emotion, intellect, and beneath them all, the silent witness. Emotions were never framed as enemies to be conquered, but as movements within the field of awareness. Waves on the surface of a vast sea. The suffering came not from the waves, but from mistaking them for the ocean itself. The Tao Te Ching speaks in a similar rhythm. When you move against the Tao, life feels forced, brittle, exhausting. When you move with it, effort decreases and effectiveness increases. This was never about moral goodness. It was about resonance, about aligning one's inner state with the natural flow rather than imposing tension upon it. Emotion, in this view, was a signal of alignment or resistance, not a flaw. Hermetic teachings went even further, suggesting that mental and emotional states were not sealed inside the individual but participated in a greater correspondence. As above, so below, as within, so without. Taken literally, it becomes superstition. Taken psychologically and energetically, it becomes precise instruction. Inner states shape outer perception, and outer events mirror unresolved inner patterns. Even in Sufism, where poetry replaced doctrine, emotion was treated as a doorway. Rumi did not tell seekers to erase sorrow. He told them to let it carve them open, to allow intensity to polish, awareness until it became transparent enough to love. Emotion was not the obstacle, resistance was. Pythagoras listened to the cosmos and heard number not as arithmetic but as harmony, the universe as proportion, rhythm, and tone. Human emotion in this frame was another instrument, capable of discord or resonance depending on how it was tuned. Carl Jung later translated these ancient insights into the language of the psyche. What you repress does not disappear, it returns as fate. The unconscious, charged with unresolved emotion, projects itself onto people, events, and circumstances. The world begins to look hostile or miraculous, depending on what remains unintegrated within you. Not because the world changed, but because the lens did. Across traditions, one instruction repeats in different symbols. Do not identify with the movement. Become aware of the field in which it moves. This was the birth of meditation, prayer, contemplation, breath work, not as spiritual achievements, but as technologies of coherence. Ways of stepping out of emotional possession and into observation. Ways of shifting frequency without denial. And here is the most important parallel of all. The mystics never promised control over reality. They promised clarity of relationship. They did not say, you will bend the world to your will. They said, when you are aligned, the world no longer needs to resist you. That is the difference between manipulation and resonance. So when modern language speaks of emotions as energy, it is not inventing something new, it is translating something old, a timeless recognition that inner state is not decoration, it is direction. And once you recognize that, the ancient question becomes urgent again, not how to escape emotion, but how to inhabit it without losing yourself to it. Human reflection, why we stay trapped in certain frequencies. If emotions are signals, the natural question becomes uncomfortable and deeply personal. Why do we remain tuned to the same painful frequencies even when they limit us? Why do we revisit the same emotional weather, the same relational patterns, the same inner dialogues even after we understand them? The answer is not weakness. It is familiarity. Your nervous system is not designed to seek happiness. It is designed to seek what it knows. Safety to the body does not mean peace. It means predictability. And if unpredictability once hurt you, the system learned to tighten, to anticipate, to brace. Over time, that brace becomes home. This is why calm can feel suspicious, silence can feel like abandonment, love without tension can feel unreal. The body confuses the absence of threat with the presence of danger because it has learned that vigilance equals survival. So it recreates the frequency it understands, even if that frequency is heavy. Emotion, then, is not just a reaction to the present. It is a memory speaking in the language of now. This is why insight alone does not free us. You can intellectually understand your patterns and still feel powerless inside them. Because the pattern is not held in thought. It is held in tone, breath, posture, expectation. It is held in the body's timing and tension. And this is where compassion becomes non-negotiable. The moment you judge yourself for feeling a certain way, you lock the frequency in place. Shame contracts the system, it signals danger. The body doubles down, but the moment you meet the emotion with curiosity instead of condemnation, the system receives a new message. It is safe to change. This is why emotional healing feels slow and non-linear. You're not convincing the mind, you're re-educating the nervous system. When fear rises, the question is not, how do I get rid of this? It is, what did this protect me from once? When anger flares, the question is not, why am I like this? It is, what boundary was never honoured? When sadness lingers, the question is not, what's wrong with me? It is, what was never fully grieved? Each emotion points to something unfinished, not as a flaw, but as an invitation. And here is the quiet shift that changes everything. When you stop seeing emotions as enemies and start seeing them as loyal messengers, their grip loosens. They no longer need to shout, they no longer need to hijack your attention. They begin to move, because movement is their nature. This is how reality begins to respond differently. Not because the past disappears, but because it no longer runs the signal. You stop broadcasting yesterday's fear into today's moments. You stop asking new experiences to solve old pain. And slowly, gently, the field around you changes. People respond with less friction. Opportunities feel less forced. Silence becomes spacious instead of threatening. You don't feel fixed, you feel available. Available to choose a different frequency without betraying your history. And that availability, that willingness to feel without fusing, is the first real freedom most people ever experience. Emotional frequency, how inner states quietly reshape reality. Once you begin to see emotions as energetic states rather than personal flaws, a subtle but profound realization emerges. Your inner frequency is constantly teaching reality how to respond to you. Not through force, not through intention alone, but through coherence. Consider what happens inside your body when fear takes over. Your breathing shortens, your muscles contract, your senses narrow, time feels urgent. You move faster, but with less awareness. In this state, the world appears hostile not because it suddenly became dangerous, but because your system is tuned to detect threat. Neutral faces look cold, uncertainty feels catastrophic, silence feels loaded. Reality hasn't changed, your filter has. Now consider a different state. Grounded calm, not excitement, not bliss, just steady presence. The breath deepens, the body softens without collapsing. The mind remains alert without racing. In this frequency, you notice options you missed before. You hear tone instead of threat. You respond instead of react. The same world now feels workable. This is not imagination. This is physiology shaping perception. Your emotional frequency determines what your nervous system allows you to notice. And what you notice determines what you engage with. Engagement determines outcome. Over time, outcome reinforces that the frequency that produced it. A loop forms, not mystical, but mechanical. This is why trying to manifest from a dysregulated state rarely works. You may visualize abundance, but if your body is broadcasting scarcity, your decisions will contradict your vision. You will hesitate, over-control, self-sabotage, or mistiming. Reality will appear uncooperative, but it is only responding to mixed signals. Coherence is the missing word. When your emotional state, bodily signals, and intentions align, you become clear. Clear signals travel farther. Clear signals are easier to respond to, people trust them, systems adapt to them, opportunities recognize them. This is why some individuals seem to walk through life with invisible support. Not because they are special, but because their internal signals are consistent. They don't leak contradiction. They don't say yes with their mouth and no with their nervous system. They are congruent. And congruence is powerful. This does not mean you suppress fear or grief. Suppression creates distortion. It means you process emotion until it stops fragmenting the signal. You feel it fully. You listen to its message. You let it complete its cycle. Only then does the frequency shift naturally. Emotion completes when it is allowed to move. Unfelt emotion becomes noise. Felt emotion becomes information. Integrated emotion becomes clarity. This is the quiet technology behind transformation. When your inner state stabilizes into coherence, reality does not suddenly become perfect, but it becomes responsive. You notice feedback sooner. You correct course with less drama. You stop repeating lessons that no longer need to be repeated. And here is the most important truth. Reality is not waiting for you to be positive. It is waiting for you to be true. That truth, embodied, regulated, coherent, becomes the frequency that reorganizes the field around you. Not through control, but through resonance. And resonance, once established, changes everything without announcing itself. The inner architecture of frequency and meaning. When people hear that emotions shape reality, they often imagine something external changing, events rearranging, people behaving differently, outcomes bending in their favor. But the deepest shift happens somewhere quieter. It happens in meaning. Meaning is the hidden architect of experience. Two people can encounter the same moment and walk away with entirely different lives because meaning decides what the moment was, and meaning is not chosen by logic alone. It is chosen by emotional frequency. Your emotional state determines what a moment means to you before you ever think about it. A delay becomes rejection. A challenge becomes proof you are failing. A boundary becomes abandonment. Or, in a different frequency, a delay becomes timing. A challenge becomes initiation. A boundary becomes clarity. Nothing external changed. The interpretation did. An interpretation is not an intellectual act. It is an embodied one. This is where archetypes quietly enter the conversation. Every emotional frequency carries a story older than you. Fear carries the archetype of the hunted. Shame carries the archetype of exile. Anger carries the archetype of the guardian. Grief carries the archetype of the lover who lost. These are not metaphors for entertainment. They are deep patterns of human meaning that live in the psyche and activate automatically when certain emotional tones dominate. Carl Jung understood this well. He saw that when an archetype is unconscious, it possesses the personality. You don't have fear, you become the fearful one. You don't experience betrayal, you are the betrayed. Reality then arranges itself around that identity because your perception, choices, and expectations align with the story. But when the archetype is made conscious, when you recognize the frequency behind it, you regain authorship. You stop being inside the myth and begin reading it. This is the essence of the deep dive, to see emotion not as chaos, but as a symbolic signal pointing toward meaning. Fear asks, where do you not yet trust yourself? Anger asks, where has your boundary been crossed? Sadness asks, what mattered deeply that was never honored? These questions are not philosophical luxuries. They are navigational instruments. When you answer them honestly, the frequency shifts, not by force but by resolution. and something remarkable happens when meaning changes. Events that once felt personal begin to feel instructional. Patterns that once felt cursed begin to feel coherent. You stop asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this teaching me about how I relate to myself?" This is not spiritual bypassing. It does not deny pain. It contextualizes it. In this space, reality becomes less antagonistic because you're no longer fighting its messages. You are decoding them. You're no longer trapped inside emotional weather. You're learning the climate. And the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. Emotion is not here to control you. It is here to guide you toward integration. When meaning aligns with frequency, the system relaxes. The story no longer needs to repeat. And reality, having delivered the message, quietly moves. Collapse of separation, when the inner and outer stop arguing. At a certain depth of understanding, something subtle dissolves. It's not dramatic. There's no flash of light or sudden certainty. It feels more like a long-held tension quietly releasing. The tension between me and the world. The assumption that reality is something happening to you rather than something you are constantly participating in. This is the collapse of separation. Up until this point, emotions may have felt like private storms trapped inside your chest, while life unfolded somewhere else, indifferent, chaotic, or unfair. But when you begin to see emotions as frequencies, a different picture emerges. You realize that the line between inner and outer was never as solid as it seemed. Your internal state was never sealed off, it was always in dialogue. Not in a mystical sense that blames you for everything, but in a relational sense that restores agency. The world responds to how you meet it. When you meet life armored, it feels abrasive. When you meet it collapsed, it feels overwhelming. When you meet it present, it feels responsive. This does not mean life becomes gentle. It means it becomes accurate. You stop mistaking echoes for attacks. You stop mistaking old pain for new danger. This is where duality begins to soften. You no longer experience emotions as obstacles between you and the life you want. You see them as the interface through which life communicates. Fear becomes a signal to slow down and listen. Anger becomes a signal to clarify boundaries. Sadness becomes a signal to honor what mattered. Joy becomes a signal of alignment, not something to cling to. And when you stop resisting these signals, the internal war ends. The ancient traditions called this non-duality, not because nothing exists, but because the artificial split between observer and observed dissolves. David Bohm described something similar when he spoke of wholeness, of a universe that is fundamentally undivided despite appearing fragmented. When you feel separate, you live as if you are negotiating with a hostile environment. When separation collapses, you live as if you are in conversation with a living field. This shift changes how you act. You stop forcing outcomes and start responding to feedback. You stop trying to dominate uncertainty and start navigating it. You stop demanding that reality prove your worth and start embodying it quietly. And something surprising happens. The world doesn't suddenly obey you, but it stops resisting you unnecessarily. Interactions feel cleaner, decisions feel simpler. Even challenges arrive with less confusion. Not because they disappeared, but because you are no longer fragmented in the face of them. This is the great integration point. Inner coherence meets outer complexity, and in that meeting the illusion of separation loosens its grip. You realize you were never alone inside your experience. You were never cut off from the field. You were only misreading the language it was speaking. Once that language becomes clear, the argument ends, and reality, finally understood as relational rather than adversarial, begins to move with you, instead of against you. Awakening without leaving the human world. The greatest misunderstanding about awakening is the belief that it lifts you out of your humanity, that once you see the mechanics of emotion and frequency, you will no longer feel pain, confusion, or fear. But real integration does the opposite. It brings you deeper into being human without drowning in it. Integration is the art of holding paradox. You can understand that emotions are energetic signals and still feel them intensely. You can recognize fear as information and still feel your heart race. You can see sadness as love moving through loss and still cry. Awakening does not erase emotion. It reorganizes your relationship to it. Before integration, emotion runs the system. After integration, emotion informs the system. This is a crucial distinction. An unintegrated awakening often becomes spiritual armor. People learn the language of frequency but use it to avoid discomfort. They label pain as low vibration, bypass grief, dismiss anger, and pretend clarity while the body quietly fractures underneath. The signal becomes incoherent again, just dressed in sacred words. True integration is quieter. It is the ability to feel a strong emotion without needing to act it out or suppress it. The ability to stay present inside intensity without collapsing or becoming rigid. The ability to respond instead of react. This is where embodiment becomes essential. Your insights must live in your nervous system, not just your thoughts. Otherwise, they remain ideas that vanish the moment stress arrives. Integration happens when the body learns through repetition and safety that it no longer needs to hijack consciousness to survive. You begin to notice subtle changes. You pause before speaking. You sense when your body is tightening and soften it deliberately. You recognize when an old story is trying to run and choose not to feed it. Not perfectly, but consistently. And consistency is what reshapes frequency over time. In this integrated state, life does not become simple, but it becomes intelligible. You understand why certain challenges arrive. You see how patterns form. You stop personalizing every obstacle and stop romanticizing every high. You meet reality as it is, not as your wounds insist it must be. This is where maturity replaces fantasy. You no longer ask the universe to save you from discomfort. You ask for clarity within it. You stop chasing transcendence and start practicing presence. And paradoxically, presence is what feels transcendent. Integration is not dramatic, it is functional. You show up on time, you tell the truth more often, you set boundaries without cruelty, you listen without needing to win. Your frequency stabilizes not because you are calm all the time, but because you are honest all the time. And honesty creates coherence. When coherence becomes your baseline, the world responds differently, not because you control it, but because you are no kushsost. Longer leaking contradiction into the field, your yes is cleaner, your no is clearer, your silence is less anxious. This is awakening grounded in life, not an escape from the human experience, but a way of inhabiting it fully, skillfully, and with quiet power. The tone of your being is the signal. At the end of this journey, there is no technique to master, no mantra to repeat, no personality to replace yourself with. There is only a recognition, simple, unsettling, and quietly liberating. Reality has been responding to you all along, not to your wishes, not to your affirmations, not even to your beliefs alone, but to the tone of your being, the tone beneath your words, the tone beneath your actions, the tone beneath the story you tell yourself when no one is listening. That tone, shaped by emotion, regulated by awareness, stabilized by embodiment, is the signal you broadcast into the field every moment of your life. When that tone is fragmented, reality feels fragmented. When it is defensive, reality feels adversarial. When it is collapsed, reality feels overwhelming. And when it becomes coherent, honest, grounded, integrated, reality does something subtle but unmistakable. It meets you there, not by removing difficulty, but by reducing distortion. Not by giving you control, but by restoring clarity. You stop fighting shadows, you stop chasing mirages, you stop asking the world to heal wounds you haven't yet faced inside yourself. This is the moment where responsibility stops feeling like blame and starts feeling like freedom. Because responsibility, in its deepest sense, is simply the ability to respond, to choose how you meet what arises, to decide whether you will react from old frequencies or respond from presence, to recognize emotion as energy, not identity. You were never meant to silence your emotions, You were meant to listen deeply enough that they could finish speaking. Fear completes when it is met with safety. Anger completes when boundaries are honoured. Sadness completes when love is acknowledged. And when emotions complete, they no longer distort the signal. This is what it means to shift reality. Not to bend the universe to your will, but to stop broadcasting internal conflict into the field. Not to escape being human, but to become so present within it that life no longer needs to shout to reach you. In this state, synchronicities feel less mystical and more natural. Relationships feel clearer even when they end. Purpose feels quieter but more stable. You're no longer chasing meaning, you're generating it through coherence. And perhaps the most important realization of all settles in gently. You were never broken. You were never separate. You were never late. You were simply taught to misinterpret the signals moving through you. Now you know how to read them. Now you know how to listen. Now you know that the second you see emotions as energy, reality doesn't magically change. It finally comes into focus. This is Quantum Quest, where consciousness becomes the experiment.